Welcome to this explainer. Look, the global security map is basically being redrawn right in front of us, and the ripple effects are going to be felt all over the world. To really wrap our heads around this massive transformation happening on Europe's eastern edge, we're going to kick things off with a pretty bizarre scene deep in a Lithuanian forest.
Just picture this for a second. Massive armored vehicles rumbling straight out of the trees, but they're completely draped in fake moss, torn fabric, and plastic grass. Why the elaborate disguise? Well, the modern battlefield has fundamentally changed. These units are quite literally hiding from hostile drone swarms. They've been training right along Lithuania's border with Belarus, which is a Russian satellite state, and their explicit goal is to be ready to, as they put it, fight tonight.
And these aren't just any tanks visiting for some weekend drill. We're talking about Leopard tanks and Puma infantry fighting vehicles that belong to Germany's 45th Panzer Brigade. And here is the real kicker. For the very first time since the end of the Cold War, these German troops are permanently deploying abroad. They are not packing up and going home. They're stationed in Lithuania to defend its capital, Vilnius, and to secure an incredibly vital piece of geography that we're going to dive into shortly.
So, to unpack the whole shebang, we'll quickly run through our 5 key areas: Germany returning east, the shrinking U.S. footprint, the Suwalki choke point, Europe's defense reality, and finally, buying time.
Okay, Section 1. Germany returns east. A historical shift. Now, it's a massive historical paradox, right? If you look back, German armies, we're talking Teutonic, Prussian, and Nazi forces, have historically been the invaders in this exact region, conquering Poland, the Baltic states, and Western Russia. Yet today, troops from a nation that once ravaged this area are literally being showered with gratitude. The local commander even pointed out that what Germany is doing right now is exactly what Allied forces did for Germany during the Cold War. And when they aren't out there training, this modern brigade is actually out helping preserve war graves and Jewish cemeteries. They are being fully welcomed as the region's primary protectors.
And they are scaling up fast. 5,000, that's the exact number of soldiers the specific German unit is going to grow to by 2027, which is a huge jump from its initial 1,600. They are, for sure, the tip of the spear for an army that's rapidly expanding to become Europe's largest, outfitted with all the absolute latest armor, artillery, and anti-aircraft systems. Which naturally brings us to Section 2, the shrinking U.S. footprint. America pulls back. So you might be wondering, why is Germany suddenly taking on this massive burden? Well, the answer actually lies across the Atlantic. American forces in the region are noticeably dwindling. The total number of U.S. troops in Europe has shrunk from about 100,000 down to around 80,000. Key units that used to train for months in Lithuania have recently shipped out with 0 scheduled replacements. Because of this, Washington is pushing a new plan, dubbed NATO 3.0. They're essentially demanding that Europe takes the lead for its own conventional defense on the ground, while America sits back and primarily provides the nuclear umbrella. A lot of this shift really boils down to deep European anxiety over future U.S. policy. European leaders are actually sitting down and mapping out 4 plausible, distinct incarnations of an America-first foreign policy under Donald Trump. They range from what they call the tough love adult, who pushes Europe to bulk up but still protects it in emergencies, all the way down to a nightmare predator scenario, where the U.S. menaces Europe's western flanks while Russia threatens the East. It really highlights the intense and highly unpredictable geopolitical calculus that European military planners are being forced to make right now. To prep for absolutely any of those scenarios, Germany intends to transform completely from a defense laggard to a total powerhouse. They're aiming to spend 3.5% of their GDP on defense by 2029. To put that into perspective for you, by the end of this decade, Germany could be spending more on its armed forces than nuclear-armed Britain and France combined. That is a game changer. Moving right along to Section 3, the Suwalki choke point, a critical stretch. To really grasp how this huge military buildup translates into the physical realities of the battlefield, we need to zero in on what is arguably the most critical stretch of land in Europe right now. Remember those moss-covered German tanks from the beginning? To understand why they're guarding this specific area so heavily, we have to ask, what exactly is the Suwalki corridor?
Okay, so this 65-kilometer strip of land is the absolute linchpin of global security. It's this narrow neck of territory sandwiched right between Russian-allied Belarus and the heavily armed Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. It carries the Via Baltica motorway and the Rail Baltica train line, which are absolutely vital NATO logistics routes. And get this, under previous agreements, Russian passenger trains are actually transiting through here 4 times a day in sealed carriages. It's highly vulnerable, too. If this corridor is ever severed, say by drone swarms or gray zone harassment, it would completely cut off the Baltic states from any NATO land reinforcements.
Let's tackle Section 4, Europe's defense reality. Can Europe actually fight alone? This brings us to a really sobering reality check. If a conflict does erupt over that corridor, can European armies realistically hold the line without the US? Well, while they match or even exceed Russia in a few specific domains, analysts point out a fatal flaw here. America is essentially NATO's operating system. The US provides the intelligence, the surveillance satellites, the deep strike capabilities, and the airlift. Without American support, the immediate loss wouldn't just be mass, it's integration. Ground and air forces would be fighting disconnected battles. Without clear satellite intelligence, European forces would have to spread out super thinly. So instead of swift, multi-domain maneuverability, they'd be forced into a static, bloody, and drawn-out war of attrition.
Furthermore, any conventional war happens in the incredibly heavy shadow of nuclear weapons. Think about the numbers. Britain and France have roughly 200 warheads each, while America and Russia each possess over 5,000. If the US decides to pull back its conventional troops, European nations have to look at the math and wonder, would Washington really risk a nuclear war for Latvia or Poland? Without America's massive nuclear umbrella guaranteeing ultimate deterrence, European countries will inevitably have to be far more cautious about aggressively engaging Russia.
And finally, Section 5, Buying Time, the immediate strategy.
Since full European military autonomy is completely out of reach at the moment, what must Europe do right now? Well, the immediate strategy is basically a desperate sprint to buy time. They're frantically bulking up conventional forces. Lithuania alone is consolidating units to create a heavy armored division of 20,000 men. Germany is planning to drop 35 billion euros strictly on space-based surveillance and communications to replace American tech. Think tanks are even floating the idea of a double-headed NATO command structure, just to allow for European-only operations if the US sits out. But above all, the general consensus is that defending Europe right now begins with supporting Ukraine. Because the longer Ukraine resists, the more time Europe has to build up these absolutely crucial systems.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought that perfectly summarizes the new European mindset, courtesy of Poland's foreign minister. In a world where America might pull back, Europe doesn't necessarily need to perfectly match American military prowess. But here's the multi-billion-dollar question. Can it rapidly rearming Europe, led by its new protector in Germany, realistically outpace Putin, overcome its internal divisions, and build a credible defense before time runs out? That is what's going to define the next decade of global security. Thanks so much for joining this explainer. Keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.